All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Microphone, Judge Korner, please.
Not breaking the habit of forgetting to put on the microphone. Good morning to all, and Registrar, could you call the case, please? Court officer.
Thank you, Madam President. The situation in Darfur, Sudan, in the case of the Prosecutor versus Muhammad Ali Abd-Al-Rahman, Ali Kushayb. Case reference ICC 0205-0120. And for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you very much. Yes, appearances for the prosecution, please.
Good morning, Madam President, Your Honors. Julian Nichols with Claire Sabatini, Pubudu Sachithanandan, and Alison Whitford. Thank you.
Thank you. For the defense.
Bonjour Madame la Présidente.
Good
Bonjour,
morning,
Madame
Madam
les
President,
juges.
Your Honors.
Sur le banc de la défense ce matin, en plus de
With the
Monsieur
defense
Ali
this
Muhammad Ali
morning,
Abd-Al-Rahman,
together with Mr. Ali Abd-Al-Rahman,
Madame Nina Guillou, assistante en charge de
Nina
l'analyse de la
Guillou,
preuve,
in charge of evidence,
Monsieur Ahmad Issa, gestionnaire de
Mr.
dossier,
Ahmed Issa, case manager,
Madame Vanessa Gray, conseillère juridique,
Vanessa Gray, legal assistant,
et moi-même, Cyril Lauchi, conseil
and
principal.
lead counsel, myself, Cyril Lauchi.
You've lost Mr. Edwards this morning, have you?
Not lost, we know where it is.
Yes, legal representative of victims, please.
Yes, good morning, Madam President, Your Honors, dear colleagues. The victims today are represented by my colleague who's attending remotely, Mr. Nasser Amin Abdallah, Associate Counsel Anan Shah, behind me, Case Manager Idris Anbari, and myself, Nathalie von Wistinghausen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. von Wistinghausen. Yes, right, we'll continue with the prosecution opening. It's you still, I think, Mr. Edwards, yeah.
That's correct, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'll be covering persecution today, and it'll run for about 10-15 minutes, after which I'm afraid I'll have to leave immediately to prep a witness. No disrespect to the court intended. Your Honor, yesterday I concluded my submissions on Mukja, but it's useful to dwell briefly on the nature of the victim population that I mentioned yesterday. Regardless of whether the victim was a 75-year-old community leader or a 10-year-old child who was a Quranic scholar, all the victims in Mukja were male, and were accused of being rebels or supporting rebels, the victims who were killed at the execution sites. Similarly, the prisoners at Mukja police station who were tortured were again male, again accused of supporting rebels or being rebels. It is because of this targeted, discriminatory nature of the abuse at the police station, the killings at the execution sites, the use of certain discriminatory grounds to target these victims, that Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman is charged with the crime of persecution in the context of Mukja. He is charged with persecution on the exact same basis for crimes at Delej, and on a similar basis for crimes at Kudum and Bindizi. If I can start with Kudum and Bindizi, these were both predominantly Four villages, and because they were predominantly Four, they were presumed to support the rebel armed groups. And the attacks were carried out against the civilian Four population of these towns, resulting, as Ms. Sims described in detail yesterday in mass murder, rape, destruction of property, forced transfer of 4 persons. Now, similarly at Mukja and Delej, the men and boys abused and executed were predominantly 4 and were selected by the perpetrators, again, because of their perceived support for the rebels. It's important to bear in mind, as you can see in this image, that Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman is charged with persecution on political and ethnic grounds for Kudum and Bindizi, if you can see on the right side of this Venn diagram. And for Mukja and Delej, Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman is charged with persecution on political, ethnic grounds, as well as the grounds of gender. These multiple intersecting discriminatory grounds best describe and fully capture the way in which the accused and others carried out their discriminatory targeting. Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman and other perpetrators of the charged conduct, they intended to discriminate against the predominantly 4 males in Mukja and Delej, and also intended to discriminate against the predominantly 4 population of Kudum and Bindizi, because they were perceived as supporting the rebel armed groups. Now, this intent is evident in the statements made by the accused and fellow perpetrators at each charged incident. For purposes of clarity, I'll discuss this discriminatory intent separately for political, ethnic, and gender grounds. And let me begin with political grounds. All 3 targeted groups, that is to say, the predominantly 4 population of Kudum and Bindizi, the predominantly 4 males in Mukja, and the predominantly 4 males in Delej, were targeted for their perceived support for or association with the rebel armed groups. So this is targeting on political grounds. If I can provide an example from Bindizi. During the attack on Bindizi, witness P15 saw women being raped while attackers were saying, I quote, "We have taken the Tora Bora's wives, praise be to God." Again, Tora Bora here is a shorthand reference to rebel. Moving on to Mukja. During the events that I described yesterday, in February, March 2004, Abd-Al-Rahman called a community leader that he was striking with his axe Kabir el Tora Bora, meaning the leader of the rebels. Also in Mukja, shortly after the torture at the police station, when the detainees were being taken in a convoy towards the execution sites, witness 913 saw Abd-Al-Rahman walking towards the convoy, shouting, I quote, "Tora Boro is over, prepare their graves," end quote. Again, a reference to rebel affiliation. Similarly, at Delej, when 4 males who had been displaced to Delej were being rounded up, when they were being arrested, as Ms. Whitford will discuss in detail shortly, they were again referred to as Tora Bora, rebels. Later, also at Delej, when these detainees were kept in Delej and then later killed, they were again accused of having links with rebels. In sum, Your Honors, there's a common thread that runs through every single incident that we have charged, and that is the targeting of persons for their perceived support and for or association with the rebel armed groups. And this discriminatory intent is pervasive and is obvious throughout every charged incident. Moving on to ethnic grounds, the targeting of persons during the charged events was also on ethnic grounds because the 4 ethnicity was used as a proxy for identifying rebel supporters. And members of the 4 tribe were targeted on the basis of their ethnicity because of this approach of using a proxy. So if I can use an example from Bindizi, women were called by the Janjaweed, I quote, black nubas, end quote. Again, a derogatory term linked to their ethnicity. Also at Bindizi, you heard Prosecutor Khan mention the word abid, slaves or servants. And again, this term was used by Janjaweed attackers when they were carrying out their attack at Kudum and Bindizi. Similarly, moving forward in time to Mukja, when Abd-Al-Rahman first entered the cells at Mukja police station and threatened the prisoners, as I mentioned yesterday, he told the prisoners that Harun had authorized him to take the property of the four and to eliminate the four. Again, a clear targeting based on ethnicity. If we can move on to Delej. When these four males were being arrested in Delej, as I mentioned earlier, they were not only referred to as Tora Bora, they were also referred to as slaves. Again, a derogatory reference to ethnicity. While hiding from arrest, one witness could hear militia Janjaweed shouting words like, I quote, fuck the four, end quote, and, I quote, kill the slaves, end quote. Finally, in Delej, Abd-Al-Rahman told a group of arrested men, I quote, four, this is your last day, we are taking you to God, end quote. If I can move on now to the final ground of discriminatory ground, the ground based on gender. The targeting of males in Mukja and Delej was because of their presumed or stereotypical role in society as either current fighters or perhaps potential rebel fighters. And this was on the ground of gender. As I mentioned yesterday in the context of Mukja, witness P905 describes how Abd-Al-Rahman, before leaving to attack Sindhu, had told the head of police at Mukja, arrest any man coming from Sindhu. Again, the stress here in this context is on the word man. If we can move on to the next example, witness 877, when he was fleeing an attack and coming into Mukja in February 2004, just before being arrested, in fact, he was told at the checkpoints I described yesterday, I quote, all males have to go to the police building, end quote. P919 also describes how he was arrested, just like all the other witnesses who were arrested, how they were arrested with numerous other four males. Interestingly, in the context of Delej, again, it was well understood that Government of Sudan forces and the Janjaweed were looking for males. One witness says that he was given a woman's dress by a local resident and told to put it on for his own protection, again, because it was men who were being hunted. Finally, in Delej, another witness, P584, also confirms that it was men who were coming from outside of town that were being arrested. Your Honors, that brings me more or less to the end of the examples that I was discussing of persecution. But I would like to stress, even though I have disaggregated these examples into political, ethnic, and gender grounds, that's not how we should be addressing the overall persecution charge. We should, of course, be looking at how all these factors intersected and work together. And I suggest that that is the way this evidence makes the best sense. This brings me to the end of my submissions, Your Honor. But I will just remind you of the sheer extent of the number of victims who were subject to persecution. In Kudum, in Bindizi, 63 murders. In Mukja, 122 murders. And in Delej, 137 murders. Thank you, Honors. I'll end there.
I will be the next speaker, Your Honour, but we just need a moment to switch places.
It's Miss Morris, is it? No.
Ms. Whitford, Your Honor.
Miss Whitford. Right.
Good morning, Madam President, Your Honours. My name is Alison Whitford, and I'll be addressing you in relation to the crimes committed by the accused in Delege and surrounding areas, reflected in counts 22 to 31 of the confirmed charges. Over the course of about 3 days in early March 2004, the accused, with Janjaweed and government forces, arrested some 200 males in Delege. They targeted males of the Fur ethnicity, in particular those who had been displaced to Delege by attacks on villages in the surrounding areas, who they perceived as rebels or rebel sympathizers. The accused and his co-perpetrators brought the arrested males to the police station in Delege. They forced many of them to lie face down on the ground outside in the hot sun for several hours. They walked on their backs and heads, beat them, and insulted them with words like slave and criminal. They crammed others into a single overcrowded cell inside the police station. The accused personally murdered 3 detainees by striking them to the head with his axe. Then, on the accused's orders and under his supervision, the Janjaweed and government forces loaded the detainees onto vehicles, drove them to locations outside of Delege, and shot them to death. Over the course of just 3 days, they murdered at least 137 people. At the time, the accused was the highest-ranking Janjaweed leader in the locality. He had considerable power and influence over the Janjaweed, as well as members of government forces with whom he worked hand in hand to commit the crimes in and around Delege. The evidence will show that the accused had an essential role in those crimes. He was present, he participated, he gave orders, and he himself directly perpetrated crimes. Madam President, Your Honours, the evidence presented during the course of this trial will prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the accused is guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his role in Delege. These crimes, now listed on your screen, are torture, other inhumane acts, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity, murder, attempted murder, and persecution. As you have heard from my colleague, Mr. Sachitanandan, the crime of persecution is charged in both Mukja and Delege based on the same 3 discriminatory grounds: political, ethnic, and gender. While the accused and his co-perpetrators targeted 4 males who they perceived as rebels or rebel sympathizers, in fact, most of the victims of their crimes were civilians, taking no direct part in the hostilities. These people were protected under the laws of armed conflict, which also protect persons hors de combat. The accused was prohibited from targeting such civilians and from torturing or summarily killing any rebel fighter who was in his power. These are fundamental and well-known principles of the laws of armed conflict. Madam President, Your Honours, the evidence of the crimes committed in and around Delege will consist primarily of the first-hand accounts of victims and other direct witnesses. The accused, Janjaweed, and government forces carried out much of their conduct in Delege in plain view. The accused was a well-known figure in the region, and many witnesses saw and recognized him in Delege during the events. Among these were members of government forces, some of whom had known the accused for many years. To begin, I will explain the context in which these crimes occurred. On your screens now is a map showing Delege in Wadi Saleh, Darfur. Delege is seen towards the top of the map. The town of Garsila is located approximately 17 kilometers to the southwest of Delege, and to drive from Delege to Garsila would take around 30 minutes. North of Delege, the road continues to Zalangi, more than 50 kilometers away, beyond the borders of this map. In the weeks and months preceding the Delege incident, government forces in Janjaweed jointly attacked villages in this region, including Arawala, Forgo, Taringa, Andi, Fere, Kaskilde, and Jamina. Thousands of civilians from predominantly 4 villages sought shelter in Delege and Garsila. People were displaced to Delege from at least 18 different villages, as shown on the map. People made arduous and often dangerous journeys to Delege in search of food, shelter, and safe haven. Witness P980 describes how he fled to Delege after an attack on his village. Quote, "It was chaos. Some people died on their way to the mountains because they were injured or were too old. Some were killed by the attackers who went after them in the mountains. Disabled and blind people were left on their own. Families were looking for missing relatives. Mothers were looking for a missing child or a husband. We stayed hidden in the mountain for a week, but there was no water and no food. The absence of food and the constant threat of being attacked forced the people to flee towards Delege." By early March 2004, there were so many displaced people in Delege, they were forced to stay in the streets, under trees, in empty fields, in camps, and in and around the primary school. These displaced people, in particular, 4 males, were the primary target of the arrest and killing operation perpetrated by the accused in Delege. Madam President, Your Honours, yesterday my colleague Mr. Sachitanandan described the accused's role in the murder of at least 122 defenceless men and boys in Mukja in late February, early March 2004. After these events, the accused returned to the town of Garsila. On the screen now, we see a satellite image of Garsila. In Garsila was a base of the Sudanese armed forces, the location of which is now marked on the image. Within this base was a military intelligence office. At the time, military intelligence was detaining people inside this army base. Some of the people detained here were arrested on the orders or at the instigation of the accused. 6 of these detainees, including several 4 community leaders, were later killed during the Delege incident. And later in my presentation, I will explain how those people came to be in Delege and the accused's role in their murders. On or about Friday, 5 March 2004, the accused went to the army base in Gassila. It was from here that he deployed to Delege along with government forces and a large number of Janjaweed. Among the government forces were several people who the accused cooperated with to commit the crimes in Delege. 3 of those people were members of military intelligence. One was Lieutenant Hamdi Sharafuddin Sid Ahmed, and my colleague Mr. Jeremy spoke yesterday about the close relationship between the accused and Lieutenant Hamdi, who was also a perpetrator of crimes in Mukja. Also from military intelligence were officers Musaddiq Hassan Mansour and Abdul Manim, also known as Abu Lahab. The accused was also joined by an officer of the Popular Defense Forces, Abd-Al-Rahman Dawood Hamouda, also known as Hasabala. My colleague Mr. Jeremy also spoke about the relationship between the accused and Hasabala, who was a perpetrator in all 3 criminal incidents charged in this case. Over the course of approximately 3 days, from Friday to Sunday, the accused and his co-perpetrators carried out the Delege operation. The main day of the operation took place on Friday. In the early hours, Janjaweed and government forces surrounded Delege. They went through the streets and from house to house, searching for Fur males from outside Delege. People in Delege quickly understood who they were searching for. Men and boys hid. A local resident handed one man a woman's dress and told him to put it on to protect him against arrest. Witness P850 hid for a whole day with 4 boys inside a debanga, a small dry storage area inside a house. He describes his experience as follows. Whilst in the debanga, I continually heard shouting from outside and the use of the words "kill the slaves" and "fuck the Fur, fuck the slaves." I heard screaming from houses nearby. I was shaking with fear and could not feel my legs. The air inside the debanga was hot. The 5 of us had to urinate and defecate where we crouched. We could not move or make a noise. We were terrified. The Janjaweed and government forces whipped and beat people and insulted them with words like himar, meaning donkey, and Torabora, meaning rebels. The Janjaweed tied one boy, who was only about 15 years old, to a tree, beat him, and stabbed him in the foot with a bayonet. As one arrested man lay helpless on the ground, the Janjaweed stabbed him in the arm. Later, they put a rope around his neck, pulled him with it, and beat his face and head. The accused was seen in the courtyard of a house kicking a man, while Janjaweed and government forces beat him with their firearms and restrained his screaming wife and children. The accused also participated in the search and arrest operation near the market, at one of the mosques, and in a camp for displaced people. Witness P671 saw the accused arrest his father and brother in one of these camps. He describes this scene as follows. I heard the soldier say something similar to, "Your Honor, Ali Kushayb, where do you want us to put these?" The person who was addressed as Ali Kushayb was in the front passenger seat and said something similar to, "Put them in this vehicle." Two soldiers then picked up my father by the legs and shoulders and carried him to the rear of the vehicle before throwing him in the back. They then went and picked up my brother the same way and threw him in the vehicle. Some members of my family started screaming and crying. As I will describe later in this presentation, days later, witness P671 found the bodies of his father and brother outside of Delege, shot to death. Madam President, Your Honours, on your screens now is a satellite image of Delege. Marked on the satellite image is an area of Delege which contains a number of important locations. I will now show an aerial photograph of this approximate area, which was taken in January 2005. In the centre of this image are the premises of the primary school. Large numbers of displaced people were staying in and around the school, and multiple arrests occurred here. To the right of the image is Ansar as-Sunnah Mosque. The Janjaweed and government forces surrounded the mosque after the main Friday prayer and questioned and arrested males who tried to leave the building. Adjacent to the mosque was the area of the market, and to the left of the image is the Delege police station. Between the police station and Ansar as-Sunnah Mosque was an open field that witnesses say was often used for playing football. The accused, with Janjaweed and government forces, brought at least 100, and likely more than 200, arrested males to the police station. They made them lie face down on the ground outside in this approximate location. The detainees lay directly in the hot sun for several hours without food, water, or access to the toilet. Some had their hands tied behind their backs, and some were blindfolded. This was a public place in the centre of town. The police station was also on higher ground, so people could see what was happening around it, even from a distance. 24 prosecution witnesses saw the arrested males detained at this place. Several witnesses were themselves detained here. The Janjaweed and government forces walked on the backs and heads of the detainees, kicked them, and beat them with rifle butts, whips, and sticks. One soldier stabbed a detainee in the eye with a bayonet where he lay on the ground. Witness P994 observed, quote, "The Janjaweed had no mercy, and if any detainee would lift his head or attempted to look around, they would hit him, and sometimes they would stamp on a detainee's head. Everything was permitted. The detainees were beaten with the fist, whip, stick, and boot." Multiple prosecution witnesses saw the accused at this location. They saw him stand and walk on the backs of detainees, hit them with his axe, kick them, and verbally abuse them with words like slave and criminal. Witness P924 heard the accused tell the detainees, quote, "For this is your last day, we are taking you to God." Some males were detained inside the police station. One witness describes the conditions in the cell as follows, quote, "The prison cell was so crowded that some people were laying on top of each other. Prisoners' faces were so close together that they would touch, making it hard to breathe. Most were unable to sit properly and crouched. The conditions were terrible in the cell, It was hot, and people had to go to the toilet where they crouched. We were treated as animals. The abuse of the arrested males not only caused them severe mental and physical pain and suffering, it also humiliated, degraded, and violated their dignity as human beings. The accused questioned detainees and could decide whether or not they would be released. He ordered the release of some detainees who could prove that they were from Delege or were studying there. One of these detainees was witness P718, a teenager who had been arrested with his 3 cousins. He explains how the accused released him but refused to release his cousins. Quote, "My teacher explained that my cousins had attended the school but were on previous registers. Ali Kushayb would not accept this and instructed his militia to place my cousins behind me where the other captives were lying on the ground. This was the last time I saw my cousins alive." Madam President, Your Honours, it was here, in or near Delege Police Station, that the accused murdered 3 detainees by striking them to the head with his axe. Yesterday, my colleague, Mr. Sachitanandan, spoke about this axe, which the accused was known to carry with him and which he wielded against several detainees in Mukja, including leaders of the Fur community. On the screen now, we see sketches drawn by different witnesses of this axe. In Delege, the accused used this weapon to kill Sheikh Adam Abd-Al-Rahman of Massa village, who had the nickname Motor, and a man named Musa Yusuf from Gaba. The accused's 3rd victim was a Fur man who was the coordinator of the Popular Defence Forces in Garsila, named Adam Abd-Al-Rahman, also known as Genève. The accused was heard to tell Genève, quote, "I will not lose on you 1 bullet," end quote, before swinging his axe into his head twice, splitting it open. The accused then ordered the Janjaweed and government forces to load the detainees who were lying on the ground onto the backs of vehicles. They piled the detainees on top of each other and threw some of them onto the vehicles like sacks of grain. The accused was present and supervised the loading. He poked some of the men with his axe as they climbed on and told them, quote, "You are going to your God," end quote. The loaded vehicles drove out of Delege in different directions. They returned empty of detainees, and the process was repeated several times. The accused and his bodyguards went with some of the vehicles. Onlookers realized that the detainees could not have been taken to Garsila, the nearest town, in such a short space of time. Some people in Delege heard the sound of shooting coming from outside town. One man, who was detained outside the police station, saw the vehicles return empty. Believing that he would be killed, he decided to escape. He jumped up and ran away, and he was shot at, but the bullets only grazed his body, and he survived. The vehicles, loaded with detainees, drove to different locations outside of Delege, where the Janjaweed and government forces unloaded the detainees and shot them to death. On your screens now is a map showing the areas surrounding Delege. Marked on the map are villages that prosecution witnesses use as reference points to describe the directions of travel of the vehicles as they headed out of Delege. The accused went with the vehicles to an execution site to the northwest of Delej. This location was west of the road running from Garsila in the direction of Zalangi, now indicated on the map. Here, the accused ordered the Janjaweed and government forces to unload the detainees. As in Mukja, they were made to lie on the ground on their stomachs, and the accused then said, quote, "Implement the orders on these people," end quote. The Janjaweed and government forces opened fire on the detainees with Kalashnikovs and a machine gun. Afterwards, they drove away and left the bodies behind. The evidence of witnesses will establish that there were multiple other execution sites all around the town of Delej. Executions took place to the west of Delej, near the villages of Duro and Fere, and to the east, near Andi. There were also multiple execution sites to the south of Delej, near Koska and Ordo. Several prosecution witnesses discovered dead bodies that had callously been left behind in this area following the executions. Some of the bodies had their hands tied behind their backs. Most appeared to have been shot to the head or back. Witness P671, who days earlier had seen his father and brother arrested by the accused in Delej, found between 20 and 40 dead bodies in this area. He states, quote, "Among the bodies, I managed to find my father and brother, who were lying apart from each other. Although both had swollen faces, I was sure it was them. The villagers and I started digging to bury the bodies near the areas where they were found. I buried my father and brother myself in a separate grave." One of the victims of the executions that took place to the south of Delej, near Koska, was a man named Abdallah Musa, also known as Malenkwe. Despite being gravely injured, he managed to return to Delej that same evening. Witness P725 saw him there. He stated, quote, "Abdallah Musa was in a terrible condition, and it shocked us. He had what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his temple and a hole through his eye socket. I think it was his right eyeball that was missing, and the wound was bleeding heavily. 3 fingers of his right hand were missing, and his hand was also bleeding heavily. He was in a distressed state and told us that everyone who had been taken away from Delej had been executed." Abdallah Malenkwe died of his injuries later that night. Some victims who sustained terrible injuries survived. On the day after the killings began, witness P850 visited a man who had been found injured on the outskirts of Delej and brought back into town. P850 saw that his intestines were spilling out and there was soil mixed in with the wound. In relation to the people who had been detained with him, the survivor told P850, quote, "Tell their families to stop looking for them. They are dead." Madam President, Your Honours, earlier I spoke about 6 victims who were initially detained at the Military Intelligence Office in Garsila. These men are among the most widely known victims of the Delej executions. 5 of these 6 men were killed in a group outside of Delej on or about Sunday, 7 March 2004. In this group were 4 leaders of the Fur community. Their story exemplifies the targeting by the accused of 4 community leaders, such as Omdas and Sheikhs. On the Friday morning before deploying to Delej, the accused went to the military intelligence office in the army base in Garsila. He tried to take custody of 3 detainees and was very upset to learn that these men had in fact been released. Their names were Omda Adam Diges Ahmed Abdushafa of Forgo, widely known by the name Kindiri, Omda Jidda Khamis Abdul Karim of Gaba, and Adam Abd-Al-Rahman, known as Janif, the Popular Defense Forces coordinator in Garsila. The accused took custody of 3 other detainees. He said that he was taking them to the military intelligence office in Zalangi. Instead, he took them to Delej. Their names were Omda Muhammad Suleiman Abdushafa of Tanako, also known as Durbo, Sheikh Ismail Abdulaziz of Garsila, also known as Dikobi, and Hassan Adam Musa, a foreman from Garsila. In Delej, the accused ordered his men to hunt down and arrest the 3 detainees who had earlier been released. All 3 were arrested in Delej that same day. The accused personally participated in the arrests of 2 of them, Omda Adam Kindiri and Janif. As I've already described, the accused then personally murdered Janif with his axe. The remaining 5 men were detained inside the Delej police station. 2 days later, on or about Sunday, 7 March 2004, the accused returned to the Delej police station. He or his men took out the 5 detainees. These men were last seen by multiple witnesses in a convoy of vehicles with the accused on that day. The evidence presented at trial will show that these detainees never reached the military intelligence office in Zalangi. To the contrary, news quickly reached Delej that they had been killed and their bodies found in the area of Fere, outside of Delej. In total, at least 12 Fur community leaders were killed during the Delej incident. As you have heard, the targeting of community leaders was also evident in Mukja in the preceding weeks, where the accused was responsible for the murders of 3 Omdas and 4 Sheikhs from the Fur community. Madam President, Your Honours, as you will recall, the accused was the highest-ranking Janjaweed leader in the region at the time of the Delej events. During the Delej operation, the accused gave orders to members of both Janjaweed and also government forces, and his orders were complied with. The accused's authority over the Janjaweed, in particular, is well described by witness P994, who stated, "I believe Ali Kushayb was commanding the Janjaweed on that day because he was the main commander. He was the one and only commander. He was supervising the Janjaweed and monitoring their work. It was obvious and very clear to me that Ali Kushayb was giving instructions. The instructions I am talking about are all the different actions that the Janjaweed carried out on that day, bringing the detainees, forcing them to lie on the ground, beating them, and loading them onto the truck." The evidence presented during the trial will prove that the accused contributed to the crimes committed in and around Delej in multiple ways, each one of them critical. The accused ordered and participated in the search and arrest operation. he questioned detainees and decided whether or not they would be released. The accused personally murdered 3 detainees and tortured, humiliated, and degraded others. The accused ordered and supervised the loading of detainees onto vehicles that transported them to execution sites around Delege. And the accused was present at one of those execution sites and directly ordered Janjaweed and government forces to shoot and kill a group of detainees. There can be no question that the accused's conduct, as will be established by the evidence presented at trial, was essential to the commission of the crimes in Delege. Madam President, Your Honours, at least 137 people were murdered during the Delege incident. More than 12 survived attempts to kill them. As many as 200 were detained, tortured, and degraded. In just 3 days, the Darfur community lost at least 12 of its leaders, including 4 omdas and 7 sheikhs. Some villages, like Zari, Forgo, and Massa, each lost at least 17 men or boys. Some families lost multiple members. One young man, witness P671, lost both his father and brother. Another lost his brother and nephew, who was only about 16 years of age. About his nephew, he said, quote, "He was a very quiet person due to hearing problems. I believe he was unable to explain that he was a teenager and a student. He was laying down beside me the whole day until he was taken away in a Land Cruiser. I never saw him again after that day." The impact of these crimes on the families of the victims, and indeed the whole Darfur community, was of course immense. I would like to end today with a few words from witness P1018, who spoke about the importance of justice for the crimes committed in Delege and the value of documenting the names of all of the persons killed during those 3 days. History shows no mercy, and inshallah, one day, our Lord will bring us better days, when the situation is different, and when these people who committed those crimes are punished. Because these people died unjustly and wrongly, and these people's deaths were unwarranted and must be recorded. Madam President, Your Honours, I thank you for your attention. I'll now give the floor to Mr. Nichols to present our closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you very much, Your Honors. Just very briefly, that concludes our opening statements, and we are confident that we will meet our burden in this trial, and that at the end of the case, you will find the accused guilty of all counts. Thank you.
I thought my microphone again.
Yes, Madam President, Your Honours, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Common League representatives of victims. I'm leading this team with the colleagues who I have already introduced today, but I also want to mention our legal assistant, Diana Constantinidis. She's assisting us from London. And very importantly, our field assistants, Umda and Ibrahim, who I specifically want to mention, as the communication with our client, which lies at the heart of our role, would just be impossible without them. So the trial against Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman offers the first opportunity to see one of the purported leaders said to be responsible for massive crimes allegedly committed in Darfur nearly 20 years ago, facing prosecution. It is, you can imagine, a long-awaited moment for victims and communities terrorized by the notorious Janjaweed militia and government forces in Darfur. In the face of having no other credible options, the ICC is the crucial court of last resort for Darfuris. We stand here before you aware of this weighty responsibility resting upon the court, the trial chamber, and all parties and participants in these proceedings. Probably no one else than our clients have greater expectations and interests in an expeditious, fair, and clear outcome of this trial. Your Honours have made a preliminary determination that 142 of our clients, men, women, as well as children at the time of the events, have suffered harm as a result of the alleged crimes that took place in 2003 and 2004 around the towns of Kundum, Bindisi, Mukja, Delej in West Darfur State. If your Honours have recognized a victim as such, even on a preliminary basis, it already serves as some acknowledgement of what that person has suffered as a result of the charged crimes. The harm is physical, through the effects of torture or sexual violence, for example, psychological, through the mental impact of the crime on the victim, or having witnessed crimes committed against family or members of the community. And the harm is material, through destruction, loss, or theft of property, or having to flee one's home. The 142 individuals who have thus far been admitted to participate as victims in these proceedings are by no measure all of the persons who have suffered grievous harm from the commission of crimes in Darfur over the last 2 decades, or even during the attacks on the villages of Kudum, Bindisi, Mukja, and Delej, which are the subject of this case. The total number of Darfuris impacted by crimes within this court's jurisdiction is likely greater than 1 million. The number of potential victims of the attacks charged in this case, particularly when considering the crime of forcible transfer, are likely in the thousands. However, given the legal framework of the ICC, only those persons who suffered harm arising from the specific charges confirmed in this case can be recognized as participating victims. Moreover, given the current circumstances in Sudan, the victim application process faces many challenges. Your Honours may appreciate that this reality causes understandable frustration and is just a small glimpse of what has happened in Darfur since July 2002, the commencement date of Security Council's referral of the situation to the court. It is distressing that potential international crimes are still occurring in Darfur. Only 2 weeks ago, we were informed by one of our clients that his brother was killed in a region of Darfur relevant to the current proceedings, allegedly by members of militia that Darfuris still refer to as Janjaweed. That is the reality in Darfur today. Chambers of the ICC have stressed the need for legal representatives to ensure victim participation is as meaningful as possible, and to present the genuine perspective of victims to the court. Both the former and the current prosecutor have also underlined the importance of the ICC for victims. Former prosecutor Fatou Bensouda stated, and I quote, "Victims are the reason this court exists, and they are our primary motivation. And the court does not do popularity contests, but stands as a beacon of hope for victims of atrocity crimes who would otherwise have no recourse to justice. In the same spirit, Prosecutor Karim Khan expressed in his questionnaire for candidates to the 2020 election of the ICC prosecutor that, and I quote, "Victims' participation is a cornerstone of the Rome Statute system, and I would aim to help ensure victim participation works as effectively as possible within the bounds of my own responsibilities as prosecutor. Certainly, victims' groups have a right to an effective voice and to have meaningful participation in the proceedings. The right and ability of victims to independently participate in proceedings at the ICC was one of the most significant innovations of the Rome Statute, and we, the legal representatives, are here to guarantee that in this trial, this aim and bold vision of the drafters of the statute is a reality and not simply empty sentiments. We must and shall ensure that the rights and interests of our clients are remembered and respected at all times. Before this trial chamber, victims are not merely potential witnesses or passive observers of the proceedings. Victims have official status and rights as participants, which they will exercise through us. However, the role of the participating victims and their legal representatives is not that of an accessory prosecutor, and we will endeavor not to trespass this line and thereby contribute to the fairness of the proceedings. Where the personal interests of the victims are affected, the trial chamber will permit the victims' views and concerns to be presented and considered at stages of the proceedings determined to be appropriate and in a manner which is not prejudicial to or inconsistent with the rights of the accused in a fair and impartial trial. We will also request the chamber's permission to question witnesses called by the prosecutor or defense whenever matters that impact the personal interests of victims, such as the harm and losses suffered by the witnesses or others, remain to be addressed. Today and the following weeks and months are the prosecutor's time in the courtroom. On behalf of our clients, we reserve the right to present a case with a full and substantive opening statement after the conclusion of the prosecution case and before the beginning of the defense case. It is the assessment of the legal representatives on behalf of our clients that it is too early at this stage to make a full opening statement. Consultations with our clients are ongoing, and given the current circumstances in Darfur and the other places where our clients had to flee, communication is challenging and requires time and patience. Throughout the trial proceedings, our clients, including any additional victims who may be admitted by the chamber as participating victims, will be represented by us in the courtroom every day. We may then call, with the chamber's permission, a small number of witnesses to provide testimony that is relevant to the personal interests of the victims and that will assist the trial chamber in the search for the truth. Additionally, the trial chamber may grant victims permission to directly present their views and concerns to the judges in person or through written statements. The purpose of victim participation is to ensure an independent voice for victims in the proceedings, to protect the interests of victims during trial, and provide victims the opportunity to contribute to this trial chamber's truth-seeking function and the judicial process. While we represent a large group of people, it is composed of individuals, each of whom have suffered particularized harm from the crimes allegedly perpetrated by the accused. Many of them live in some of the largest refugee camps in the world, in Darfur and in Chad, but also in the diaspora, very far away from their home country. In these circumstances, the question is, what does an independent voice mean when each story and individual harm suffered is different from one victim to another, and the consequences on life, body, soul, and family may look similar on the face of it, but are factually and personally distinct. Our aim is to give a voice and convey to your honors the views of individuals, not simply a collective. I will share with you during this short opening the words of one of our clients, now a young man, but who was 8 years old at the time of the attack on his home and family in Bindisi in 2003. We asked him what he would like us to convey to your honors about his hopes for this case, for his future, and for the future of the people in Darfur. He stated the following, and I quote, "We want to return to our land. Our land is there in Sudan. For us to live in peace and decide our future for ourselves and our kids and our future generations. That is my dream. This war has devastated us and brought too many political and social problems. None of that can come without justice. Justice is very important to us." End of quote. I would like to conclude by addressing a sensitive but crucial aspect of victims' participation, including the right to reparations in the event the accused is convicted. If victims are merely passive observers or limited to the role of witness, they may be less likely to feel that the proceedings matter to them, and perhaps less likely to be satisfied with the trial and its outcome. Not all affected victims want to participate, but for some, it can help them to live better or even move forward with their lives after what has happened. But very rarely will a criminal trial, including the current proceedings, fulfill the full expectations that victims may very understandably have. This is an unfortunate truth that lies in the delicate connection between aspiration and reality. But we, as legal representatives, will make sure at every moment of this trial to live up to the humble role envisioned by the Rome Statute and the mandate that has been entrusted to us by our clients and the trial chamber. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. von Weinhausen. Yes, now, Mr. Lauchi, you asked us whether the accused could, Mr. Al-Rahman, could make a statement, and we've agreed, but I think I ought to check with you that you've confirmed that again with him and that you've advised him of potentially the problems.
Madame la Présidente, the statement that Mr. Abd-Al-Rahman would like to make is something that has been thoroughly discussed, and I think he fully understands what is the difference between the kind of statement that he's about to make and any sort of witness appearance that he may ask the permission to have in the course of the defense case, if at all. But he is aware of his right to remain silent and not to say anything that may incriminate him.
Yes, very well. Then, Mr. Al-Rahman, you have 5 minutes to address the court. Why is this?
Bismillah walhamdulillah.
Mr. Abd-Rahman, in the name of God, and may his prayers and peace be upon his prophet. First, I thank the presiding judge and the honorable judges for granting me this opportunity to speak today as the humble person I am, speaking in my own name, Ali Muhammad Ali Abd-Al-Rahman, a grandchild of Caliph Abdullah al-Taisha. I was born on January 1st of 1949 in Sudan, in the locality of Rahad al-Burdi, and I come from the tribe of Taisha, a child of Taisha parents, and I am not connected to any other tribe. The leader of the Taisha is Abd-Al-Rahman, Mahmoud Abd-Al-Rahman, Bishara Ali Sanusi Uthman, a grandson of Caliph Abdullah al-Taisha. Caliph Abdullah al-Taisha is the founder of Sudan, and he has marked the history of Sudan since 1916. The Taisha tribe is in no conflict with any other tribe, such as the Four, Masalit, Zagawa, or any other tribe in Sudan. The Taisha is a tribe of peace and harmony. My second point is what brought me here to the Netherlands. I came of my own free will. No one brought me here. And I came here to correct the misleading falsehoods attributed to me. And I congratulate the International Criminal Court for being a fair court of law. My third point, to the gentleman in charge of the Transitional Military Council in Sudan, under the command of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the chairman of the Transitional Military Council, General Muhammad Hamdan Dagalo al-Mahamid, the deputy chairman, General Shamsuddin Kabashi, member of the Transitional Military Council, General Atta, a head at the Transitional Military Council. To them, I say, you ought to prioritize the Sudanese people and their security, and I hope that the elections of 2023 be held properly. It is my hope that you will be successful and that the people of Sudan be successful and that they live in peace and security. Lastly, we pray for the souls of the martyrs who gave their lives in Sudan from all tribes during the tribal disputes, the acts of rebellion, and during protests. And we pray for their souls and for God to receive their souls in His eternal heaven. My last point is to extend my gratitude to the presiding judge and the honorable judges for granting me this opportunity in this court. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Al-Rahman. Right. I think your first witness, Mr. Nichols, who's calling the Mr. Dewal?
That will be Mr. Jeremy, Your Honor, and I'm afraid we would need the break.
Right.
We're not ready just at this moment, so we would need the break, please. We miscalculated a little bit the time.
Yes. All right. In order to, I was thinking to sit at 11:15, but are you saying you need the full bit till 11:30?
I'm sorry, I have to say I don't know exactly. That's a good question, and it may be up to the VWS who would have the witness now. So I'm able to come back to check. I apologize. I'll see if I can find that out while I'm standing up. But
yes, I'll just do some checking. The court officer says that the VWS have been in touch and he's ready to start at 11:30.
Okay.
All right. I'm a bit just. I hope that we're not going to go on losing time like this, but I appreciate at the beginning of the trial it's always more difficult.
I understand, Your Honor. We'll try to coordinate this better for the next witnesses.
Yes, very well. All right. We'll adjourn now until 11:30. Thank you.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.